way back in the 6th century BC as a minor administrator, and has kind of achieved her position today with very few administrators ever did. Can we think of, we've had very good undersecretaries and deputy secretaries and so on, but do we ever think of a deputy secretary or undersecretary becoming like a prophet? Very difficult. But he somehow combined this in a way which is uniquely Chinese. And I'm very glad you quoted that in that poster when you talked about government and virtue, because this is going to be something which I'm going to spell out in a minute or two in much greater detail. Anyway, he started as a minor bureaucrat, but then he became a kind of wandering guru, going from state to state, imparting his advice and knowledge to different kingdoms. And China at that time was not united as an empire. It was still a collection of very small kingdoms. They were all quarreling with each other, fighting with each other. It was somewhat of a chaotic world then, as it is indeed today in many ways. So there are quite a lot of similarities between 500 BC and right now. And funnily enough, in that age, there were a whole lot of other wise folk around in different parts of the world, give or take 50 or 60 years. There was Gautam Buddha here, Mahavira, there was Zarathustra in Persia, there was Socrates and so on. Now, when Confucius started off, he kind of looked at the whole world, and he said that rather than take grand concepts and kind of distill it down, I will start from the very here and now. And again, as I said, you start from individual human beings and start working from the specific to the general. And so he started, his whole theory was one of action and one of looking at the individual and going from the individual to the group, to a larger element and so on, to encompass the whole of society. And his view actually of human nature, which is very important, differs very significantly from the Western view, and here lies the seed of what we are going to talk about. The Western view of human nature, which started, and by Western I mean the Greek, Judeo-Roman view, started off with the view that man is a kind of fallen angel. He is a kind of, he has committed the original sin, and therefore he is an incomplete being in many ways. And therefore this forms part of the whole issue of how man is to be dealt with. And going along, and I'm simplifying this enormously for lack of time, when man was this man with all these faults was in the state of nature, that is living in a jungle or a tribal society, men were all wild, living in that situation, each man for himself, they were fighting for survival. So if I wanted food, I grabbed it from here. If I wanted something else, I grabbed it from there. Meanwhile, everybody was grabbing stuff from me. So all this was happening in that state of wild nature. And as Hobbes, the philosopher, put it, in this kind of situation, man's life was nasty, brutish, and short. Now, in this state of affairs, man would have become extinct very quickly. So what they did was, at that time, they said, well, this can't go on. So they probably chose the man who had the strongest arm and the thickest club and said, hey, you be the sovereign, the Leviathan as they called him. We will submit a little bit of our power, surrender a little of our power to you, and you become the king and you keep the peace amongst us. And that's how society started getting organized, and the whole institution of royalty and kingship came up, and then the whole story goes on of how the feudal age came to the Western world, and then how capitalism started and democracy and so on. The rest of it we all know. So it's all started in this kind of way. Therefore, in that kind of model, government was a necessary evil. It was a necessary evil because this Leviathan represented the government. You gave away a little bit of your power, he kept the peace and kept everyone okay, and this was a necessary evil. But being a necessary evil, you had to have as little of the government as possible. That was the ideal. That reduce the government as little as possible because they're bad guys and they will do all kinds of bad things, and keep individuals as much in charge as possible. Now, in China, strangely enough, or maybe not so strangely enough, Confucius' view is very different. Confucius' view of human nature was that, hey, look, human beings are not as individualistic as the model I've just told you, because human beings, right from the time they are born, when they're babies, they are along with other people. You have your mother, you have your father, you have sisters, brothers. From the age 0, you are socialized in some way or the other, maybe well, so maybe badly, but you are with other people. And so you start your life learning to live with other people, with your family, with your community, and so on and so on. So Confucian philosophy was all about learning how to live with other people, and rules of conduct, firstly to do with your family, then to do with your society, then to do with your community, then to do with the state, and so on. And he actually said, well, if we can learn to live firstly with our family, then with the larger groups and so on, we will learn how to govern the entire universe. There will be what he called harmony. And harmony is a very important concept in China. And Confucius was very clear when he said harmony is different from uniformity. Harmony actually means that difference is welcomed, but difference is kind of coordinated so that it becomes beautiful and not ugly. It's like an orchestra which has got 100 instruments, but they all play in harmony, so it sounds beautiful. If you have 100 instruments but they don't play in harmony, then it sounds awful. So the whole trick is, how do you get harmony? How do you kind of achieve harmony whilst having all these differences? And one of his famous statements is, maintain harmony though difference exists. And he said the way to do this is actually through what is known as self-cultivation in China, which is a practice of reflection and learning and education and example and leadership through actual action, which, as I point out, comes very close to what we have understood in our ancient philosophy. In China also, because of this model of relationship starting from the individual, the family, the group, the clan, the village, the community, and ultimately the government, the important logical flow of this was that government was not seen as something different from the individual. Unlike the Hobbes model, where the government is a kind of necessary evil, here the government or the state was just an extension of this group. You have a small group, you have a family, you have a larger group, a larger group, a larger group, and then you have the government. So here there is no antagonism per se between the individual and the government. It's just a question of different roles and how you harmonize the roles.